Hello. Today we're going to look at a particular business scenario that comes up fairly regularly with our Collabware customers. And that's about how do we manage standard operating procedures or policies, or corporate policies using SharePoint and Collabware CLM. So I've got a few slides just to show the concept, and then we're going to actually go through a little bit of a demonstration as well. So overall, I think maybe 15, 20 minutes, just a nice quick overview of the concept. The business problem itself is really how do we provide up-to-date and current policies and procedures to our staff, right? Have them be able to find, maybe go to one location, find and access the most current approved versions. We don't want them accessing drafts of things, obviously. We don't want them to access things that are no longer relevant. So how do we get them to access the most current stuff? We also have lots of organizations in our department or in our organization, a lot of departments in our organization who develop their own policies, so we don't necessarily want to force one way to do that within your entire organization. So you want to have different departments maybe draft and approve their own policies, but still have those show up in the same single place where all the users can see them. We also may want to conduct periodic reviews as well, take a look at things every 2 years and determine whether or not those policies are still valid, whether they need to be superseded or updated by something else, or maybe perhaps they're obsolete, in which case we want to get them out of the picture right away. The fourth thing we want to do is be able to clean up stale or content that's really no longer relevant. You might have had some working copies of documents. Maybe they're hanging around in the library, and wouldn't it be nice to be able to automatically clean that up so the stuff's not hanging around. And then finally, we also want to apply the appropriate retention policies to those corporate policies and procedures as well to make sure that they're destroyed at the appropriate time and that we've got a proper evidence and disposition certificate that they existed and that they were destroyed. So what does that look like from a conceptual architecture? So let me just walk through briefly what that might look like. This is just sort of just a little diagram that I've sort of put together. So first, what we want is we want a place where all your users can go to find the current approved policies and procedures. This is just a view of your approved policies and procedures, and it may be a site somewhere. Maybe it's a common site on your corporate portal they go to, but that's the one place where they can go to and see all those things. And in fact, Collabware CLM Intelligent Query can actually provide this. You can pop this on any page. You could have the same query on multiple pages, and what it will do is it can actually pull out and present to your users the published, final and approved policies in a nice organized way where they can sort and filter and group those things in meaningful ways. So we're going to show you what that looks like in the future. But the idea is that this is not a place where you actually copy and put these records, these documents and procedures. Those things live in maybe their individual departments, right? These are the areas that develop them. They're the custodians of them. They maybe create the drafts and then make them final, do the approvals all through here. And so what we do is the concept would be to leave those approved documents out in the various libraries that created them. So maybe HR has a library, they do their HR and personnel policies. Maybe you've got some sort of delivery department. Maybe there's the safety and operations department. So they have different ways to do things and collaborate on their documents. So there's no need to necessarily pull those and copy them other places, right? Creating copies always causes other kind of problems as well in a records world. So why not just have them in the one place? So we do that, but then we also apply a workflow. Don't worry about all this detail down here. It's pretty small to read, but we've got a workflow. I'll show you this on the next slide. But while those things are drafted and made final, we also have a certain lifecycle workflow for our policies. We go through a developmental phase. We go through an approval phase. We then maybe publish it. We have a periodic review that takes place, and at some point we don't need that anymore, and there's a retention trigger that needs to kick in, and finally we do disposition. So some of that workflow needs to happen, right? So once something actually becomes non-relevant anymore, maybe it's superseded or obsoleted by something else, then what we want to do is move that to the record center. So we can just mark it through our review process that we have on a periodic basis, or at any time that the department decides they want to do that, they can mark it superseded or obsolete. And in that case, what we want to do is get it out of this area as soon as possible over to our maybe to a record center, different spot. When we get it out there, we remove it from our standard operating procedure view, right? So it's no longer there for end users. And then what we'll do is we'll just sort of lock it down and we'll have it live its life, according to the policies, if it's keep for 5 years after obsolete or something like that. And at the end of that whole process, we'll finally do the destruction, but we'll create a disposition certificate for that as well, so that we actually have evidence that it existed and we describe the policy that authorized us to delete it in the first place. So that's in concept. Now this is an example of a policy or a lifecycle workflow that we developed. This is just concept. Your particular policy could be completely different than this, but this is just one example of how you could support all of those business requirements with a Collabware CLM workflow. Let me just grab my highlighter here. So just looking left to right, what we have is, and we'll walk through this in the demonstration as well. But the first step we have is we have a process where we're doing the initial development, right? And this is a situation where you're drafting up some documents, or you're maybe collaborating with other people. We have the process here to clean up stale documents. So I've got a little rule here that says, hey, you know what? If if no updates occur on a particular document within a year and it's still a draft document, maybe I might want to consider getting rid of that. So let's have a little review for business value. Right? And when I have that review, I could decide to destroy it, or I could actually decide to retain it as well. Hey, you know what? I'm not really finished with that. But once I finish all that development work, then what I can do is I can mark it ready for review, and I'll go through a review process, right there. So I'm going to make it a record, which means don't delete it, right? I've marked it for review, so I don't want to delete it, but I could maybe keep additional versions if I need to. If it's denied, I need to revise it, right? I can have different versions. I'm going to put it into a approval for publishing review process. And from there, my approvers are going to be able to either approve or deny that request. When they approve or deny, we're going to set some metadata values. If it's denied, we're just going to set that metadata value, the status to work in progress, and we're going to go back to the draft world, and you can cycle through there as many times as we need to. If it's approved, then it's going to pop over and set the status to final, and it's going to do a few other things as well. We're going to change a metadata value. We're going to publish a major version of that if there's still minor versions that exist. We're going to lock it down, which means we're going to make it immutable, so you cannot change any metadata values or any of the content inside that. And we're also going to change the security. Maybe when we're drafting these documents in our library, we're doing that with our own little local team, and not many people have access to the draft version of that content. But once we actually publish it and approve it, we want that available to the broader audience. And so we have some workflow actions that allow us to set security on that and make it available to in SharePoint Search and to our intelligent query to a broader set of users. Right? Maybe that's all users. Maybe, again, it's appropriate to whatever the policy is that you're working on. And once we do that, we now put it into a state of hanging out, retained for 2 years for the 2-year review. So that any time between now and the time that 2 years happens, the appropriate people in the HR department, whoever created that policy, has authority. They've got the authorization to either supersede that policy with something else, or to mark it obsolete, right? Or they can just sort of wait for those 2 years to come up, and what we'll do is we'll put that through a review process. And that review process will automatically send an email to the people who are defined on the reviewer lists, and they'll be asked to enter into the review, put their comments, and then choose to either complete the review itself, or to maybe mark individual documents as obsolete or superseded. And it'll just cycle through that every 2 years. Once they are marked obsolete or superseded, like we said in the previous one, we want to sort of move it out of the way, get it out of everyone's way. So what we'll do is we'll actually move it from its location that it's in, whether it's an HR library or operations library, wherever, right? We'll move it, get it out of there, and then it will actually change the security to lock it down. Maybe just lock it down to the records managers, right? again, you can choose how you want to control that. And now we're going to just enter it into the known retention period that we have for our policy, for our corporate policies. And in this case, I just chose 5 calendar years. You could have fiscal years, that kind of stuff, right? And then at the end of that period, what we're going to do is we're just going to have a disposition approval. Again, just like all the other disposition approvals that we do with Collabware CLM, you can define different options. I define a destroy option and a delay option for that. And once that's destroyed, that will complete the life cycle, and that obsolete standard operating procedure will now be destroyed, and we'll have a disposition certificate at the end of it that has all the evidence that existed and what happened. So this whole approval process up front, you may have your own approval process. You may use some in-text workflow or whatever to do all that already, which is fine. You don't have to have all this approval process in there. Maybe you just have the final piece where it's just maybe setting the final or just entering into the retained for the review process over here, right? So this is just a concept, an idea of all the different ways that you could use Collabware CLM in the management of your corporate policies. So with that, let's take a look at, that's funny, those still exist. Let's take a look at our demonstration and see how that might look in real life. Okay, let me bring up my SharePoint demonstration environment. So this area, what you're seeing is this is just my, let me just turn that off. This is just my demonstration environment. This is like an end user portal. I've got my portal homepage, my administration page, HR department, things like that. And what I've done is I've created, in my administration area, I've created my view of all the current active policies and procedures. So that's what this is here, right? We can see this view. Here's my maintenance procedures. Here's my HR and finance. I got a few other ones in here as well. And the thing that's important here is this is something that's provided by Collabware CLM. If I go behind the scenes, this is a saved query that we put on this page. And behind the scenes, what it is it's looking for certain things. Look for content type equal to corporate policy. Look for a certain document status. Look for things where it's not been superseded or obsoleted, right? So it really can refine and provide a view of your current approved policies, no matter where they exist in SharePoint. You can also change and determine how you want to display that information. I chose to have the department and topic of those things set up there. And I can also choose how I want those sorted and grouped as well. So all of those things are available as part of the configuration tool for our intelligent query. Right? And the end result is you've got this thing, the saved query, that you can put on any of your web pages. And what this does, this is actually looking at a bunch of different libraries. I've got 2 procedure libraries in this site, but HR might have their own in another site, and I can pull all those things together with that query. So now let's go to where we do the development of these things. So I'll just go to the corporate procedures library, and here you can see I've got a few policies in play. I've got some policies that I've already been made records, already been declared, and they're sort of they're active and they're waiting out their term. Right? We got the little lock badge on there as well, and I can't do anything with this. Right? It's locked down. So if I try and edit it, right, it's not going to allow me to do that. It's going to come up and say, hey, this is locked down. What do you want to do with this? Right? So it's a record. You can't do stuff like that, but you can maybe take a copy and create a new version, stuff like that. We also have our developmental ones in here as well. So here's an employee handbook that I'm working on. It's just a work in progress. So it does not show up in our normal view of approved documents, but it's here as a working document that my corporate policy people can see and work on. So let's add one in. So I might have a procedure document. Let's just create one. Let's create one here. Yeah, working loan. Okay, let's do working loan. Do I have that one already? I do have that one already. Let's just change that up. Let's do working from home, New York. Maybe there's something regional around there, right? So let's just bring that into our procedure library. And you know, the library is already set up to accept procedures, and the kinds of metadata that we defined and we wanted to include about procedures were things like the department or the topic. Again, this is just an example. You may have different kinds of metadata or attributes about your standard operating procedures that you want to search, sort, group, or filter your content by. And you know, these are just ones I've typed in, but this could be managed as well. It could be a managed list that you have to pick from. So I'm just going to pick IT, perhaps. No, maybe HR, and then this might be some topic, workplace, right? I have my record classification here. This is my tie to my file plan, but again, you know what? I always want to automate that as much as possible. I don't have to, you know, go out here and figure out what's going on. So I'm just going to leave that empty. And this is just a draft that I'm working on. So we're going to add that into my environment. And here we can see it's just at the top. And if we just refresh the library here, we can see that we've automatically allocated it to the correct place in the file plan. You know, maybe HR policies go one place, maybe IT policies go a different place if they've got slightly different rules. So that's okay, right? It doesn't really matter. We can automatically handle that. So once it's here, let's take a look behind the scenes now and see what's going on with that when we first added it in. It's not a record yet. I could delete this. I don't really know if it's going to really move forward, but we've entered it into a workflow so we can at least grab it and manage it. It's a draft. When it's ready for being updated and whatnot, I can put it, I'll set some status and preserve it. If I don't do anything, it'll get cleaned up at the end of the year, or at least some messaging and an approval process will come up and say, hey, you know, do we need to keep this around or can we get rid of this? From this as well, just working from let's quickly get my email up here for a second. If I have if I'm working in email, for example, and collaborating on this with someone else, right? I may have my, here's my corporate procedures library here. Here's our collab mail product, right? So I might have, want to send a link of this new one, Working at Home New York. So I can just say, you know, copy URL. I can send that to Mary or myself and say, you know, hey Mary, can you please, you know, here's the link to the document. Can you please make your updates to it and whatnot? So a lot of different capabilities that you have to collaborate on the development of those standard operating procedures. I should also point out as well, you have co-authoring ability within SharePoint as well. If you install the, I believe it's the Office, what is it now? The Office Workplace Server, Office Web Application, sorry, that's what it is. You have the ability to co-author, so multiple people can be in that document at the same time, doing updates to it at the same time. So it's pretty cool. But now, once I'm actually finished with making my updates, what I can do is I can just sort of set this to a review. So I want to set this to review. And what's going to happen is, so I've set it to review, so it's going to just pop down the list a little bit there, right? And if we go and look behind the scenes, what we can see is we've moved this along its life cycle, and we are now in a approved for publishing phase. All right, there's a couple options around that. So I've marked it approved for publishing. So what is that? What does that mean? What does that look like in the real world? Well, what's going to happen is I'm going to go over to our Lifecycle Management area now. This is where we manage all of our review lists. And a reviewer is going to get an email. I have a bunch of different things here. Reviewers will just sort of see this review lists, and they'll only have access to the review lists that they actually have authority to look at. Right? So in our example here, what we have is a couple of review lists that we have here. This is the one that we just created. And for review lists, you can set them up with a certain threshold about how frequently you want them to start. So how big do you want this list to grow before you send it off? You can have a list of 1, like a threshold of 1. So as soon as something gets in there, it will automatically start for you as well. Or in this case, I've just got accumulated to 10 because I need to show this as part of the demo. And inside, you can see what we'll have is our procedure document, right? And there'll be different things that we can do with the approval process. But let's go and actually start this review here. Again, this would start automatically. When it starts automatically, whoever's defined in my workflow as the reviewer for this will get an email with a link, and that link will take them right here. This demo is all running off of my laptop, so sometimes it's a little sluggish. So the reviewer will come here, and the reviewers, here we can see the participants. This is just the corporate policy review committee. So all the members of that I've defined on that committee will get the email. They'll be able to come here and look at things. They can see the document. If they wanted to take a look at it, then what they can do is just open the item itself. Oh, that's right, it just has to search crawl. So yeah, just a little bit quick on that. Not a big deal. So what they can do is they can open up that document to look at it. They can make comments. They can see if you want to make comments on individual item. So IT approves, right? You can do things like that. You can comment on the entire list if you like. And ultimately, someone will then have to decide what to do. Do I approve this or do I deny it? If I deny it, I just sort of set a status to work in progress and it goes back in the loop. But if I approve it, so let me just check that out. If I approve it, it's going to move it forward through its process, right? And I also have, I've set this up, this review process to generate a certificate, a review certificate. And this will provide evidence that this review took place, the details and the metadata that was part of that document as part of that review, and that will be just kept in our audit database for future reference. So once that's started, what happens is these things get processed through something we call timer jobs in SharePoint. So we have a couple of these timer jobs set up, so it doesn't happen immediately in real time. Sometimes it takes a couple of minutes for stuff to get crawled and whatnot. So I've actually pre-baked a couple here. Let's just refresh this. So just in a few minutes, this will change. And if I go back to, right, so here we have HR, we have no working alone here, we just have 4 documents. So we're going to come back to that in a few minutes. When it finally does get approved, then it will automatically set the, let's take a look at one of these other policies that we have. It will automatically set some metadata values, and then it will go through that process that we just looked at, which was, oh, I have to just shrink this a little bit to see. There we go. So it went through the process of approved for publishing, and then when it was approved, we set it to final, we published the content, we marked it immutable, which means don't allow any more changes to it, and we also popped it into an area to hold on to it for a 2-year review. Actually, let's go to bring your own device one. The other one had an older workflow. Here we go. This is a little bit better. Yeah, published content, marked immutable. Here we set security, right? We executed this set security, and now we're holding on to it. And now what can happen to it? Now that it's published and it's in its review state, well, we can do things like supersede it with something else. We can make it obsoleted. Again, only the people who are authorized to have those privileges can access these things. Normal users obviously could not do that, right? Or if nothing happens, this just hangs out now, as is, right? Until the 2-year periodic review happens. Let's just refresh that and let's see if our working alone New York. So it's got lock, there we go. I see our lock badges on there. It's marked as final, which is great. Let's take a look at our list. And here we go. So now, where's our HR? Oh yeah, still the search crawl just still needs to kick in. Again, we'll come back to that. So these documents are hanging around, and they're now displayed in the view of the approved corporate procedures. and they're just waiting for the normal review. That normal review, 2-year review, will happen just like we had the approval before. So it'll kick off just after 2 years, and the approval process is the same. Approvers get an email, they'll come to the link, they'll do what they need to do. So I apologize for the noise out there. Someone seems to be power washing out of my office. So the next step is, well, what happens if we want to, this thing now becomes something that we don't want to have in play anymore? What do we do, right? Let's just say that we have an updated, bring your own IT device. So how can we manage that? Well, let's go and grab one of these. Let's go grab that document. Let's try and edit that document. And let's just take a copy of it. So it's going to say, hey, do you want to take a copy? So I'm going to take a copy. I'm going to make a revised update to that. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to save it in here as maybe version 2. Right? It doesn't have to be called version 2. You don't have to do that. I'll just do it for demonstration purposes. But I like to manage the versions as different documents because they are, like SharePoint has its own versioning. So you can have minor versions and major versions of the same document. But I find that having a separate document with its own workflow and be able to relate the previous and the new one together is really the most practical way to manage these things. So this is a new policy, right? So I'm going to create a version 2. I might have my own review process that I'll go through for this as well to review and approve it. And then when it's ready, what I might do is I'll actually select this one and the old one, and I'll say, let's supersede that. Where's my relationship? Let's supersede the old one with the new one. Okay, so what date do I want that to occur? Maybe it's going to take effect at the end of the month. Maybe I've gone through the approval process for the second one. It's all set to go, but I don't want it to kick in until this certain date. So what I can do is I can save that. This is our own supersede page, right? And it has the list of all the current stuff over here, and this tells us the source, right, this one, right, will supersede the target, this one, on October 31st. Oh, I see, I did pick the wrong one. That's okay. And so what you can do is you can set that up ahead of time, and you basically hit apply. And at that date, what will happen is, Employee Handbook version 2 will take effect. Then standard operating procedure will get superseded. It will no longer exist on that view, and it will get moved to the record center and the security lockdown on it. Let's do that. Let's do that with an obsolete, because they kind of work in the same way. Let's do it with an obsolete here. To bring your own device. So what we do is we're going to mark it obsolete. Right? So we're going to trigger that. It's going to authorize user can manage that. It can be done with an event like we just did right here. And when that completes processing, there we go. So we now see it's actually disappeared from our list here, right? It's no longer part of our library where we're doing our development, right? It's obsoleted, so it's moved it to the record center, right? What does that mean, moving to the record center? Well, let's go look at our compliance center here. And let's go look at our corporate policies, right? We have a little repository here. And if we actually open up that location, this is where it moves to, right? Here's our bring your own device, right? So it moved over here. And if we actually look at its details now and its lifecycle details, we can see, well, first of all, here's a full audit, right? The full audit of all the activities that occurred against that. Right? So we added it, I just added it this morning. We entered it in different workflows. We declared it, we preserved it, right? We marked it obsolete at a certain time, we moved it. So all that action, all those audit actions are all audited and logged, right? Also, even view access is logged as well. So you can actually tell who has actually viewed a particular policy. But as from a workflow perspective, what's the history of that workflow, right? We were hanging around in our retain for 2 years. And what happened? We marked it obsolete. So we moved it along its workflow, marked obsolete, moved it to repository. We locked down the security on that as well, right? And then we're going to retain it for 5 years according to our policy, and then ultimately be able to do the disposition approval around that. So from an end user perspective, what have we done? Well, we offer the ability to have one place. Where's our HR document? Did our HR document come up there? There, working alone in New York, right? So it's a current active approved policy. It now shows up in our current active policies list, our current version of the truth, right? When it gets destroyed, it gets moved out. Where's my IT one? Bring your own, that's version 2. I don't have version 1 in there because it's been removed, right? Which is great. And I've got the ability for my individual departments to manage their own policies the way they want and approve them, right? And then once they're approved, they'll go through the entire process. So really, just sort of going back to our example here. There we go. So just moving back to our example, you know, what have we been able to do, right? We provided up-to-date policies and procedures so that staff are just told to go to this one place. That's all they need to do, no matter what the procedure, and you'll get the most current approved versions there. We don't need to manage copies because it's a view, so we allow individual departments to draft and approve their own policies and their own libraries the way they want. We also support the ability to conduct a periodic review, right? So every 2 years, we'll kick that off, right? Or, well, in this example, 2 years, you could have your own review period. And you can have different review periods for different kind of policies as well, depending on what your requirements are. We saw the ability to clean up stale or no longer relevant working copies. We can do that automatically. And then finally, you know, at the end of the day, when their life cycle is complete, we apply the appropriate retention policies. So ultimately, we think that's a pretty simple, seamless, and transparent way to manage all of your corporate policies. Again, this is just an example, a concept to show you the kind of possibilities that exist with Collabware CLM and corporate policies. You may have different particular policies that you manage, but that's okay, right? I think that we can accommodate those. Our workflow engine and workflow designer is flexible enough to accommodate those things. Thank you very much.